Hello, welcome to Hydra's Den. I'm Hydra. Today, I am not joined by my co-host of Golem or anyone else like Trent. They might come in at some point. I sent them a message. Today is a little bit of an unorthodox thing. We're going to go over a question I've been asked a lot, which is how do you make X? Which can be campaign, it can be your scenario, it can be whatever it is. I'm going to shut off this music because it's just kind of in the way, and we'll start as large scale as we need to. It's an open call stream, so anyone who wants to come in can come in, like Burzum here.
Hello.
Yeah. Um, and I'm generally just going to take any questions and just go through as much as possible in as much detail. What exactly, if you ever want to make a D&D campaign or whatever, Pathfinder, whatever system you come across, whatever system you want to make for, I'm just going to kind of go over the general pointers and what I do, and hope it helps. So yeah, Burzum, you were asking specifically like where we're going to start.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So where we were going to start is well, with honestly the most simple step, which is coming up with your first idea. So you got to look at what system you're running. You've got to look at a few things. The most important things I'd say are figure out what group are you running for? Are you running for a group of friends? Are you running for a group of nobodies that you met on the internet? Well, nobodies is a bit rude, but you get the idea. Or are you running for some people that you knew online and you kind of know them? Generally kind of pull the room, figure out what you're going to be doing. It's a little harder if you don't know what you're getting yourself into, but you get the idea. Like, you're saying something, Burzum?
I'm not.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So the idea here is you want to know what you're going to be running. Are you going to be running a high octane action thriller? Are you going to be running a political, very slow pace type thing? This could be determined by your system. This could be determined by your personal feelings about each one. But, well, if we're going how I do it, I'm probably going with something that's going to be very action oriented. The way I run these is I sort of go by this. What I like to call it is the cinematic approach. For me, a D&D adventure or a GOPD or whatever I'm running is almost like a movie. You've got your highs, you've got your lows. You have to use very colorful language. There has to be these very memorable scenes. It's got to be something that really gets people going. So what I'm going to look into is I'm going to be thinking, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? So in this case, let's just go through it step by step. What I want to do today is I'm just going to start making notes. I would use either Paint or Notepad. Let's say we're doing Dungeons and Dragons, okay? Yeah, so we're doing Dungeons and Dragons. What does that say? We're doing some sort of high fantasy thing. Unless you, Burzum, if you want to add anything, like, let me know. What do you think? What would we add here?
Uh, sure.
Not sure. Okay. Let's add in. We'll do a little short thing. Okay. This is for where let's say we're running for some people who have never played the game before, so we're going to be running a low level. Okay. So that tells us a few things right off the bat. We know that we're going to be probably running. Generally, I notice that people like to run at level 1, but they often get a little ticked off because like level 1s, at least in 3.5, they can die to house cats. That's a bit silly to me. So I like to start them level 2. So we're going to go level 2. Level 2, and if this is going to be taking maybe a few months, let's say it's level 2 to level 4. That's my general range that I'm aiming at. So I've got to keep that in mind when I'm writing up any sort of material, when I'm writing up creatures. And while whatever creature I want to put in, I'm going to put in. I'll find a way, typically either by debuffing the monster if it's too strong, or by giving the player some sort of workaround for that particular encounter. I'm still going to have to keep that in mind, that there's a certain amount of endurance that low level players have. Okay. So now we need a location. I'm just going to I'll grab Faerun or I might grab, what are the other ones? There's Even Watch. That's not right. Anyways, I've got a whole set of books. There's the Forgotten Realms. We go. Kingdoms of Calamar. There's what else? There's freaking Dragonlance, Eberron, whatever you want, or you can make something up, something up yourself. In that case, I would suggest making your starting with a map. You want something typically that's going to have a lot of land, unless you're going high seas, and high seas for low levels I wouldn't. But and by that I particularly mean a lot of shipped combat, a lot of aquatic combat. You're going to want to keep away from that with low levels, because people who are just starting are not going to like that. So we know that we're landlocked, and we know that we are probably going to end up, if this is people's first encounter, first time playing, they're going to want to counter something very nice and classic. So there'll be a dragon, it will be a Hydra, it'll be a beholder, something nice and fantasy, or maybe just a crazy wizard. Okay, so we've got a few things down. We've got an idea of our big bad, which is going to be, I don't know, it's going to be a classic monster of some sort. We've got that we're landlocked, and we've got that we're in low level zones. So now we can focus in a bit more so. So let's take it a bit further. People are going to be starting their first time. We want them starting in somewhere, you know, nice and classic once again, because the reason why I'm going back to classic every time is because when someone who's new to something like tabletop gaming comes in, they're going to have this idea of what it is. They're going to have this idea of a bunch of nerds around a table, you know, rolling dice and slaying the dragon. It's the classic European fantasy. So for your first time at least, I would suggest feeding into this, because, you know, it's what they're expecting. And it means that, well, you don't actually have to put in anywhere near as much work making up stuff. It's going to be a lot more satisfying for them too. Of course, you don't have to follow that. You can go with whatever you want. But this is just for my example. This is how I would go about starting my campaign. Laying out kind of the basic rules. You're going to figure out that type of stuff. Now, we're going to not go completely, you know, tropey as all hell. So we're going to want to take a few steps from here. As I said, they're going to be starting in somewhere nice and... okay, where the hell did my thing go? They're going to be starting in somewhere nice and classic. Let's start them up in a low-level peasant town. And that will be in a classic tavern. So you can make up whatever sort of town you want. You're going to typically have the usual staples of blacksmiths, whatever. Let's see, blacksmith, tavern, church. Inn, well, inn can sometimes be the tavern. Mayor's house. These are just usual staples. Then you can add typical things depending on where it is. If it's next to a water source, you're going to logically add a fishing, some sort of fisherman's house, some sort of place where they can sell the fish. So a fish market. These are little flavor things that you can add. Or if there's mountains nearby, they might have a mine. So you might add some sort of refinery or something like that. So we've got all that in order. We've got the general idea of where we're starting these people. Now let's think about where we're going to take them. Okay, so we're going to, as I said much earlier, we're going to need a big bad, and we're going to need a story. So for my story, usually, as I said, since I'm coming in with a sort of cinematic approach, I come in with an idea in mind of some particular thing I want to happen. It'll be something very direct, something very particular. So in this case, just off the top of my head, let's say I want the scene of knights fighting a dragon. I want that to happen. So everything that's going to be happening is going to be set around that idea. So I've said in our monster, it's going to be a dragon, okay? And I've said in that I want a scene with knights fighting a dragon, because I want these guys to experience that. It's always fun to have that sort of moment, like in, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is The Hobbit, with Bilbo running away from Smaug and him, you know, snaking around all the piles of gold. So I want something like that then, but maybe we'll tone it down a bit so that they can actually fight the dragon, because, you know, they want to slay the dragon. So we now have a dragon. Now, why we need a why now. So, why is this happening? And by why is this happening, I mean why is this adventure happening? So, this is our conflict. We have a dragon, and we have put him, wherever. I'm just gonna switch over to a Roll20 thing so I can kind of the Burzum's gone. So I can kind of go through this now in terms of how I'd set it up in Roll20. So I've got this. I'm just gonna grab a generic map. Let's see. I'll just grab a map from my pile of crap. Forgotten Realms. Oh geez. Yeah, I've got my Forgotten Realms stuff. I'll throw this down in, let's do Sembia. While I am using places that already exist in the world, I am by no means going to be sticking to their lore. I'm just using this because I'm not penning at my own maps. So this atrocious quality abomination will be the setup where these players are playing. So I'm going to start them. Let's get a little X marks the spot. Okay, that'll be a little harder than I thought. Let's do a little caravan as a logo for them. That's atrocious. I'm just gonna grab whatever I can find. I am sorry for this. I'm just gonna grab something. Typically, you're gonna want to have accumulated by this point a decent collection of. No, here's a token. Decent collection of pictures and stuff for your inspirations. I'm just using this generic one. Let's just say this is one of your players gave you this. So I'm going to place this down right here. And I'm going to say this is where we're starting out. Okay? Ignore that in the background. Somebody's just fiddling with the door. Give me a second. In the middle of the stream. Okay, so don't know whether or not that's going to show up, and that'd be a little silly if it does. Ignore the Lenovo here. I don't know why that's still here. So we're going to be starting, let's just say, what's that, Sarloon? Sure, Sarloon. We are starting at Sarloon. And we're going to spin a little picture for them of what the city's like. But as I said, we want the dragon to be a serious part of this. So let's find ourselves a point where the dragon can be. We've got some little islands down here, so and some water. As I said, that means we're going to have to put in some fishing flavor. We'll probably have a fisherman's village. And these people are going to find themselves together, and they're going to find a reason to go after this dragon. Let's say I'm just going to put a little castle right here. Now, there is going to be a castle here because I like castles. Okay, this atrocious castle, we'd find a better token later, is where we know that they're going to go. So now we need a dragon. Sure, red dragon, bada bing, bada boom. Dragon is now in the castle. So we've got these things in order. Now we're going to have to think of why the dragon is going after them. In this case, let's make it nice and easy. Dragons are classically dicks. Dragon is kidnapping people from the village. Okay? Kidnapping people or you know what, he's eating people because he's a mean dragon. He's eating people and he's stealing gold. Pretty straightforward, which means the dragon's going to have his own pile of gold. Gives the players a very nice generic reason to fight the dragon. We don't have to have any big moral quandaries here. As I said, the idea that I came in with was I want the players to fight a dragon. Anything else is just going to be enabling this event to happen. So we've got that in place, and now we would throw together some writing here. So now from here, I am going to write up things like I'm going to write up a bit of fluff. There will be a hell of a lot of writing here. So first thing I would write is I'm going to write. Well, I've established that what the dragon's doing. I'm going to write a bit of starting town. So starting town and starting event. This is going to be where I would paint in some flavor. I'm going to describe I would describe the town and the players as they enter the town a bit. I would give the players a bit of time here to sort of figure out who they are, what they're doing. As I said, this is their first time playing, so I want them to kind of get some time to really flex their creative juices. That sounds really awkward and immature and inappropriate. What I'm saying here is that, once again, these are new players. New players will typically not be able to roleplay properly because they won't be comfortable yet with it. So you want to give them some time to sort of feel their way into it. As I said before, I'm taking all viewers who want to come in and talk about this. I'm happy to talk. I know I was talking over Burzum a little bit there, but you talk to me and we'll have a conversation about this. And so yeah, as I said, I'm going to give a bit of flavor to the town, and I'm not expecting too much out of this first session. I'm expecting this to be I said I was the time is probably going to be about 2 months for this entire campaign, because I'm going to have people who come in let's just say every Saturday. And that means that we're going to have a total of 8 sessions. If we're lucky, someone might leave, someone might dip, someone might not come, someone might have other plans, someone might have to leave early. In general, your sessions will be about 5 hours each, and that puts us, if we're lucky, up to 40 hours right there. Like, that's a pretty big campaign right there. Even though we're starting with a pretty low expectation, as I said, levels 2 to 4. So, how do you get levels 2 to 4 stretched out into that sort of big, period? How do you get that level 2 to 4 where it looks pretty straightforward? As I said, the players will just walk on over to the dragon and kill it, right? Nope. We need something to sort of split this. We need something to split them from just going straight to the dragon. We want the dragon to be the finale, so we're going to add in a lesser villain. Now, who's this lesser villain going to be? I would take requests from the audience, but I don't think the audience is... Oh, Clonery Man's here. And yeah, Lenovo's going to probably be there forever. If anyone has any suggestions of what sort of villain they want, just let me know. But let's do a group of kobolds. Okay, so this dragon is going to have a cult of kobolds that follow him. So with that in mind, let's take this dragon and move him up into what I assume are mountains, and are now, because I assume that they are now mountains. So the players are going to need to get to the dragon, but first they will have to deal with some kobolds and probably a dungeon or two. So how are we going to set that up? Easiest way to set this up actually is to make it slightly less straightforward. So to remove this sort of direct going straight to the final boss issue, we're going to conceal the final boss. The dragon's going to be an issue, but he's not going to be a big issue yet. Actually, this dragon right now is going to be a sleeping dragon. Oh, there's no sleeping red dragons? Well, very well. He is now a little... Oh, did I just drop that out of the... Here, you go. I appear to be a little tarded. Here we go. A little baby sleeping black red dragon. A sleeping dragon. He is sleeping in the mountains. He is just a tale for now that they have heard of in this castle that was ruined long ago, and he now sleeps in there forever. Okay, so he's not an issue right now. We want something that gets the players going. We want something that gets the players' attention, and that's going to be our kobold subplot. Or I guess technically now it becomes a kobold arc, story arc, whatever you want to call it. So kobolds. We would definitely... that is not how you spell kobold. This is how you spell kobold. Okay, and I got a bunch of goblins. So we got some kobolds. I'll definitely need some kobold tokens for this, so I'm bringing them up now, because, gonna need them later. So let's just say this guy right here, this funny guy with a stick, and nah, he's too dumb. This guy, I would actually probably find a real kobold art asset that looked halfway decent. There's a lot of sites you can use for this. On our Discord, I have a link to a couple of them, but some of them that I use are sketches on Pinterest. And honestly, I do a lot of just Googling just to find stuff. If I want a particular shade of kobold, let's say. I might look up Kobold Wizard and get a nice little picture off in DeviantArt, and we'll copy and paste that. So let's use our imagination here, unless I've got any pictures quickly and at the ready of kobolds. Something tells me I do not. Yeah, no, I don't have any pictures of kobolds at the ready. That's probably because I don't use them that often. But we're going to use our imagination once again and pretend that we have... Oh, never mind. Armored kobold. Sure. This guy's the chieftain of the kobolds. So he is our first little problem. He is a servant of the big dragon. And because the dragon is just starting to wake up, something we just came up with, he is going to be causing problems for them. Now, you got to... The reason why I'm going through this is the idea that no villain is completely disconnected from the world around them. No creature exists in a vacuum. Any sort of villain that we come up with, we have to remember he's living in a world that is populated by this dragon. It is populated by the adventurers. It is populated by so many global events. Most global events won't affect him because he's just a little guy in the middle of nowhere. But what will affect him is things that are directly in the area. So this dragon will probably be one of those things that affects him. So kobolds naturally have an affinity with dragons. If we look at the monster manual or anything like that, or any of the other related materials, we'll find out that they're sort of servants to dragons. Often they're slaves. They're minions for dragons. So this guy is going to be, let's say, he's an ex-chieftain, like the sort of general of this dragon. When this dragon was rampaging around, this kobold was his right-hand man. Okay? And by right-hand man, I mean chief goon. We talked about goons on another stream and how to do them justice. So I won't go over that too much more here, but the general points are going to be, you're going to want to give him a little bit of flavor, a little bit of personality, make him into something that the players will remember, because we're not going to kill him off just yet. So first dungeon is going to come up, and it's going to be kobolds. We know that now. So the players, starting in town, starting at their tavern or what have you, the players are going to need a kick in the pants to get going. And our kick in the pants in this case will be a kobold attack on the village. So kobolds will attack the village because they are going to be producing food and stuff for the dragon. As I said before that the dragon's going to be, stealing gold and eating people. We're going to bring that out around the finale when this is going to become a real, problem where the dragon will, as I said, we're going to have that oh shit moment for everybody when the dragon wakes up. But for now, it's just going to be the kobolds stealing and looting and being general nuisance. So we had the players in their tavern when, boom, a kobold army attacks the village. Well, a kobold raiding party attacks the village, okay? So our starting event is going to be kobold attack. Also, let's remember kobold general is sub-boss. I'm going to call him a sub-boss because it's generally the kind of idea that I call them. Or the right-hand goon or whatever fits your particular fancy. This kobold attack is going to be something very straightforward. And once again, I'm using kobolds in this case because of their connection to the dragon, because I want to sort of wrap this all up in a nice theme, but also because kobolds are very easy to kill and surprisingly stupid. So it's probably going to be, let's just say we have a group of 4 people. Level 2, honestly 6 kobolds is fine. At this point, I'm going to need to make sure that I have looked through the DMG. I have the Dungeon Master's Guide. I have looked up the stats on kobolds. I know exactly how kobolds roll so that I can make sure that these are, kobolds going in kobold fashion. So we're going to look that up. I'm going to pretend like you've done this because it's honestly, I'm not going to bore you with me perusing through the DMG for a while. I'm going to assume that you know how to stat out a creature if you're here. If you don't, all I can say is read the book, do a bit more reading, because the idea here is I'm going through sort of the one step past actually understanding the rules. It's how to make your session. So you have your kobold set up, and now we're going to have to make this world map I've been using is going to generally be our give me a second. Sarloon is generally going to be our world map. So that's what the players are going to see when they just look at things from a distance and when you're giving flavor. So we have our actual direct battle now. So in here, I would make a village. I would give all of the particular little things to this village. I would I would have a bunch of fancy houses. House, house, house. I'm going to use some sort of logic to this. Assume this is the town square because that's a nice place to start, and it's a good place to have a nice battle, which means you're going to have houses generally in sort of a circular or square pattern around it. These houses are going to be generally stores. They're going to be market stalls. The tavern will definitely be there. The church might be close to there because this is a core sort of cultural spot for this town. This is a very key point. Okay. So, because it's the town square. It's where everybody gathers to do everything. So, you have your players statted out. Assume we have 3 more players, and this is the tavern because I assume you're going to have much better pictures than me. I am just freehanding this. As I said, you're going to look up your assets. Roll20 is lovely for these. It used to be so much better, but they've really knocked down. Note, you might want to go to maps, tiles, and textures, and let's do house. There we go. There's some nice houses. Some lovely houses. I would use these as houses. The reason why they're all locked into the grid is because I have everything on objects and tokens right now. If I go to map and background, they're going to be a lot, more proper sized, and I can stretch them out. If I want them to look a little different than the other houses, I can flip them, or I can flip them again. I can take other houses, do the same idea. You probably get the idea by now of what I'm doing. I'm setting up sort of an array of houses around this town square so that the players have something to work with. I would probably throw in some flavor too, like a market stall. Market stall, sure. Market stall. Whoops, threw that one out of the map again. Market stall, sure. So I would make sure I'd measure everything out, make sure everything makes sense in terms of size. You don't want your houses to be too big or too small. You don't want your market stalls to be too big or too small. Just remember that a 5-foot square is probably, like, if you laid a person down, that's probably about the size of a person in D&D. D&D people tend to be short. Or maybe they'll be a little bit taller than that, but they'll generally be about 1 square. So if you're imagining a stall, the way I do it at least is I imagine laying down 2 people head to toe next to one another and try and think, how wide is that? So in terms of a house, let's just say this house we have here, it is 5, oh, no. Where the hell is the ruler? Ruler? Is that the ruler? There we go. They made the ruler look so different. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. 35-foot house. So you're imagining 7 people laid head to toe and trying to imagine what that would look like. Use your head a little bit. Think about what kind of house that is going to be. I once made the tragic mistake of making my houses like about this box size, and then I was like, I have houses that are 20 feet by 15 feet. These houses are not houses. This tavern is tiny, absolutely minuscule, and it would be absolutely stupid. So don't make mistakes like that. Try and keep a little bit of thinking about, what's the size of this and what would players think about that. So we got that out of the way. Now we're going to have our starting event, as I said. Kobolds attack. We've got 6 kobolds. When I did up these kobolds, I would have the stats for each of them. I would subtly change each of them. The spear kobold maybe has a little spear, so he has a little bit of reach to his attack. He looks like he has a shield there. Let's give him a little bit of armor there. This kobold is... Who's this kobold? This kobold is just... He's got no armor on. He's just got a club, so he's going to be a little weaker. We'll use him as a nice goon, and this is the gooniest of them all. Or maybe he's a spellcaster. You know what? Let's make him a spellcaster. He's going to be our spellcaster. He'll have some sort of generic, very weak spell, and he'll stay at the back. He's going to be probably the leader, because spellcasters typically will be the leaders in your force of goons. Once again, we've gone over this before. We have 1 kobold who's slightly better armored than the rest. Then we've got our 4 goons, and we got our spellcaster. So the players will assemble, the players will fight. Generally, we go through our turn order, players attack people, kobolds attack people, and the kobolds are subsequently slaughtered. So From here, we can move into our first real adventure that these players are doing. They'll have felt pretty good about killing those kobolds, but now we need to sort of get them on the adventure. So start the adventure. And how do we do that? Well, first thing that happens is, these players just killed the attacking kobolds. We're going to have, we can have two ways we can go with this that immediately come to mind. Either A, the kobolds stole a bunch of loot. Maybe they kidnapped a person. Maybe they stole some priceless treasure. Regardless of what it is, the people are going to be very unhappy. So some kobolds got away. Okay, that's one way we could do it, and that's the way I'll do it. Other ideas could include such things as, I don't know, the mayor comes in, tearfully says, these attacks have been happening for days now, weeks now. We need some brave adventurers to go stop it. And of course, that's where your party jumps up and says, I will do it. But in my case, some kobolds got away with, let's say, priceless treasure. It's going to be an ancestral heirloom sword. Let's make it a sword. So it is an heirloom sword. Now this is going to be our first real treasure that the players are going to enjoy. This heirloom sword is probably going to be, they're only level 2 to 4. If I want them to really have some power, maybe I'll make it a magic sword. It's going to maybe be a low-level magic sword, just a little bit more powerful than usual. It's just a little bit of a special thing, right? Or it could just be a masterwork sword. It could just be a piece of garbage. But in my case, it's going to be a magic elven sword that was given to them by an elven priest. Elven priest. Sure, elven priest. You know what? Why not? Elven priest. He came by. He was sick. Like, this is just easy fluff you can make up. The elf was. We are going to spin a story here. The elf was sick, and the people took care of him. And as a result, he said, "Look, I used to be a warrior. This is my magic sword, but I don't need it anymore. In case any of your people ever become super cool warriors, here's my magic sword." And then he left. So we've given some sort of connection between the people and the sword, but we've also established a sort of connection that's going to hold on. I don't hear any music. Oh, hello?
Hello.
Oh, hello, Albert. Welcome to the party. So, I was just going over sort of how I would set up a first little starting quest, let's call it that.
Okay.
Yeah, so feel free to chime in at any time if you have any ideas about what you think would be added to this or anything you want to do with this. I'm just going through, as I said, a whole how to build a adventure.
Okay. So is this like a first dungeon kind of quest, or just any first mission for the leaving the quest hub? We have our heroes, and they want to test their mettle.
Precisely. So in this sort of adventure that I've just written up for the players, it starts in a happy little village. Players are gathered in the local tavern because they always are, and in this case they get attacked by kobolds. So my final sort of idea is that I want them to fight. My final idea is I want them fighting a dragon. Okay.
Okay.
So I need to start them off with something a little bit smaller because you don't throw them straight into the main boss. And my idea was a level 2 to 4 adventure. It's going to probably take about 2 months with a session every Saturday. That's 8 sessions, 5 hours each, 40 hours.
Yeah.
I've given the dragon a motivation. He's eating people. He's stealing gold. That's why people want to kill him. And he's not quite awake yet because while he's just sort of snoozing, the kobolds are like the little sort of minor bads, and they're bringing him food and gold.
Okay.
So that's that's going to be the lead-in to the dragon eventually. So we've set up a town. The town's starting event is going to be the adventurers gather, and they get attacked by kobolds, right?
Yeah.
Some of the kobolds are going to get away. and they take a priceless treasure with them. In this case, an heirloom sword, a magic elven sword that was left by a priest that once came and they took care of, and in exchange, he gave them the sword. So, this sword eventually is obviously going to end up in the hands of the players because the players want a power up. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
So, what we're going to do here is we're going to set up a little dungeon. In this case, I'm going to put it, it'll be somewhere close enough that the players can walk there, but it'll probably be far enough that it takes them a day to get there, so that we can have, the night encounters, the rest up, watch for, take turns watching for any sort of encounters, inevitably get attacked by the wolves, that sort of stuff.
All right.
Yeah. So, I mean, and you can let's go through that. Like, what do you think they should be attacked by in this case?
Well, for the overnight encounter, even just in general, you should really have an idea of how many players you're going to be having, and then kind of balance the encounter according to the number of players.
Yeah.
So, continue.
Yeah, I was thinking it's going to be level 2s. It's going to be 4 level 2s. Classic party.
Okay, so around 4 players, you always have to keep in mind the action economy of 5th edition, or depending on what edition you're doing, the action economy really can break down the game, even if you have a few high-level players against lots of small enemies.
Okay.
So, for example, goblins are always a fun choice to throw at people, but since the theme is dragons, you could do more kobolds, finding out that they have the sword, so they're going to try to get that, or they're just trying to get the gold from the adventurers.
Yeah.
Or it could be depending on where they are. So, are they in an elven forest? Are they? What's the topography?
I just took something from my collection, which was Sembia from Faerun. So it's it's next to the water. We're talking portside towns, so we're talking fishing villages. It's a pretty open area if you actually look over at the Twitch stream. And I just kind of went through and threw some guesswork together. I'm starting them in this place that I think is Sarloon. I don't know what that actually says, but I'm assuming it's Sarloon. And they're going to be playing around in this sort of nice big flat river province and eventually move into this mountains here. But you did bring up a good point about the forest. So let's actually take them eventually into the forest and to the dragon. That's actually right there. We have immediately planned out the whole adventure in terms of our road trip. So as you said, kobolds. That's actually a great idea. That some of them, as I said, these kobolds are gathering gold for their awakening dragon deity. So some of these kobolds figured out that the adventurers are coming after them. They doubled back and they're going to ambush at night. So at night encounter, typically you're going to want to either ask the players if they're going to be having someone take watch, or the players will come up with it themselves. If they don't, feel free to punish them. I enjoy doing it, but not too hard. It's the first time. You don't want to completely spank them. And so the kobolds attack. You're going to throw together another little page here. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but draw out your tokens, draw out your kobolds, and have a little fight. The wizard will probably be at a disadvantage here. He might not have had time to prepare his spells because he was supposed to be sleeping. Same with the cleric. So with that in mind, as you said, the action economy and everything, I'm more used to 3.5, but similar issues come about.
Yeah, similar issues can still arise. If you have 10 kobolds and 4 players, for example, that's not a balanced encounter.
Yeah.
But even if you have double the amount of number of kobolds to number of players, just the fact that there's going to be so many extra turns for them to attack and just kind of pick away at the party can be a thing. But alternatively, the road encounter doesn't always have to be combat related. It could be more RP. They could have just come across a group of merchants that were heading towards the town that had been ambushed by kobolds, and it's more of like an RP event. Less just hack and slash, but then you actually kind of you start to build depth for the town, even if it's for a one shot. You be like, okay, this is why we need to kill the dragon and help those people. Yeah, precisely. You put a face on it.
That's a perfectly good idea. This is as I said, this is a short but full run. We're talking, as I said, 2 months, probably 8 sessions. But yeah, no, that's actually a great idea as well. I completely forgot about that actually. Yeah, you do have non-combat encounters while you're on the road. The things that you write on the road, in my opinion, are just as important in some cases as the stuff that you write while you're in cities, because it gives a lot of flavor to the world. It makes the world less of a bunch of sort of disconnected points that you just go from point A to point B to point C, and it
Yeah.
makes them alive.
Yeah, especially for like a port or a riverside city, those tended historically to be big hubs of trade.
Yeah,
So it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibilities for traders or merchants just to be traveling down towards there to try to move their wares, thus
precisely.
creating even more chaos. Having the economy is not just the people that are being attacked, but the economy of the town is being attacked. That can really double down on the pressure for something to be done.
Exactly. So what you're doing here in general though is you're lighting a fire for the players. The biggest problem I've ever had in a session was when the players stopped and asked, "Wait, why are we doing this?" And that kills the session, because if you haven't written it right, you have to stop and say, "Oh, I don't know. Why are you doing this?" And then sometimes the players will turn around and say, "We're not," and then they'll walk off and you've lost your story. So
Yeah,
the way you do this typically, the way you're going to do this is, in our case, we have bright and bushy-tailed new players. These are going to be people who are looking for adventure. These are going to be people who want to see the Dungeons and the Dragons. So, hold on, is that too loud? Did someone got someone writing a radio in the other room? I don't know if that's going to be picked up by the mic, but
I'm not hearing anything. Should be fine.
okay. So as I said, they're going to be wanting to do that. So giving them things like these merchants that were attacked. In the first session will probably be up to that first night encounter I was talking about. Because and that's actually very generous, because you're probably expecting at least 3 hours just to make characters. Like I'm dead serious when I say that. 3 hours is not actually very generous for Symes.
Yeah, that being said, too, is it's good even while you're doing character creation or just your general session zero, which is a whole different idea to go into. But I find if I hold a session zero, that's really kind of setting the groundwork. So if I'm having my players make their characters at the table with me or individually, however we plan on doing it, the session zero is really kind of laying the groundwork before the dice start rolling. So some people like to use their session zero for character creation, and then at the end there's a small little start rolling some dice and doing some damage kind of encounters.
Yeah,
But I feel like a lot of character creation is probably best done in your session zero.
precisely. In my session zero, the way I was laying it out was you'd have character creation, you have the meeting in the tavern, so you give them a little bit of getting their feet wet in terms of roleplay, and because they're not going to fully develop into their character until a few sessions in. And I was going to have the starting village attack and maybe the first night attack, but I would probably actually, just because as I said earlier, I'm a sucker for theatrics, I would probably actually stop when the players go to sleep, and say that that would sort of give some flavor as as the sun sets, your weary party sets tents and rests for the night, and then sort of close it up and have a nice little dramatic, and this is where we end our session.
Yeah, the desire to know more intensifies, so they look forward to the next session.
Precisely. It's enough of getting their feet wet. It gets their brain sort of running on it. As I said, if you lay out the sort of first idea that they have, which is that there's kobolds and they have stolen this magic sword. This magic sword, I'm gonna have they're probably gonna get it. If you look at the screen at some point, the stream, I set up a few boxes, and those are my ideas for little dungeons. It'll probably be the second dungeon in that they actually get the magic sword, because I want the magic sword to be held by the general, and I want this first general, because I just realized we should probably have two. This first general to be a goon, or maybe the general's going to have a pet. Let's give him a pet, actually. What's a nice pet for this kobold general?
Well, you'd probably want maybe a cockatrice or another small but relatively fearful reptilian or draconic entities. So maybe a cockatrice, or the thing with giving kobolds pets is they're kind of already at the bottom of the food chain.
Yeah, well,
So you could alternatively they could lend themselves more towards kind of the goblinoid, so they'd have like a mount, so maybe like a warg.
that's a good point. I'm thinking in terms of, because I was hoping boss, and then this general guy, I'm hoping to put him as a right-hand man type. So that's actually a good point, that kobolds are at the bottom. So in that case, we might want to upgrade our kobold a little into something that's going to be a bit more, well, impressive. He's still going to have to be an intelligent boy, but he's going to be, because this dragon is probably going to be like, it's going to be on the very young scale, because we want the party at level 4 to be fighting him with very low level magic here.
Yeah, they're going to be fighting probably a juvenile dragon, probably a juvenile red dragon, being that red dragons are kind of the Dungeons and Dragon. They're the most notorious and famous for the franchise, would be the red dragon. So even as like a lieutenant or a general, even bump them up past kobold status, like this could just be a red dragonborn that sees like the power and potential in this dragon. And the Dragonborn is the one commanding the kobolds, so you kind of have that scale kind of pick up a bit, and then that lends itself to that Dragonborn being able to have something a bit more fearsome as a pet, because you wouldn't have any kind of intimidating reptile monstrosity taking commands from a kobold that it could one-shot, literally.
You're completely right. So, yeah, let's do that, actually. I can't actually take this asset because it's a premium asset. God, I hate this system they decided to implement, but where they
that
assets. But I've got a little one that people can see here, and I'll just use this one. This is definitely the type that I'd look for, though. One of these two. Let's just use this placeholder because this is a Dragonborn I once used. This boy is going to be our second in command. We're going to use some fantasy generator and give him a plenty imposing name. We're going to
the stream is currently showing just your text document. I just have the stream open on my other monitor.
Right. Sorry. Here
okay.
We go.
Could you drop me a link in Discord for the Roll20 and I can pop in? Might make it easier to follow since there's stream delay.
Yeah, actually, sure. I'll go and drop this. Let me just grab this. And PM that. Here you go. And so yeah, as you said, a red dragonborn. We're gonna probably want him to be. I'm gonna put him at level 3 because I want him to be the thing that they beat to put them to level 4. Okay.
All right.
So he's going to be the second last thing they fight before the dragon himself. And that's going to be where they get the magic sword, because that just sounds like a nice way to, set up for the dragon himself. I'm going to put him, or maybe, let's put him over here, and we'll put his pet. I don't know, but the first thing that came to mind to me was like a manticore or something like that. I know manticores are in general probably too tough for this level. What I would probably do is I'd clip its wings a bit, so to speak. I would downscale its stats considerably. Just because, as I said, this is their first time. We want to give them classics. Cockatrices scare the crap out of me because anything with an insta-kill, I have had parties blunder into those way too many times.
I mean, with cockatrices, when they turn things to stone, at least in 5th edition, it only lasts for 24 hours. Oh. So being turned to stone isn't necessarily a kill. Like, if a Gorgon turns you to stone, there are ways that you could come up with, even if it's not rules as written, you could come up with lore-wise, so you need to get Gorgon's blood and then have it distilled down or have some kind of magical incantation done on it to have it reverse it.
I just got the perfect idea. So, as I said, I've been setting the... I'll have to extend you over. I just realized you'll probably not be seeing this. I just got the perfect idea. So, if you notice the way I am sort of tracing out this journey, they end up in this little wood here, right?
Yep.
this is going to be an elven. There's going to be an elven city in here because you've got to put an elven city in the forest. It's dwarves go in the mountains.
Is it even a forest without elves in it, or is it just a place with trees?
Exactly. It's not even a place. So elves provide a great way to sort of first off kit out the party better, because you're not going to find the level of gear that they're going to need for fighting this dragon in a normal human city. And it provides them if one of them inevitably gets petrified, because players will blunder. It is the nature of things. When the players finally get here, they will get petrified. They will hear about the elven city where an elven healer can heal them, and that'll take them even closer to our destination. But we're jumping a bit ahead of ourselves. That kobold general, that we made up earlier, he's not going away. As you can notice here, we have 3 sort of boxes. These are the 3 dungeons before the boss. This kobold general is going to be the general of the first dungeon. So the way we do this is, the way we're going to set this up is a breadcrumb maneuver. So the kobold general is your first sort of mini boss. He will hint at the second sort of dungeon and mini boss, and that will hint at the third dungeon mini boss, and that will hint at the final. It's generally a way to, you daisy chain it together, and your players who start, just taking out a few kobolds because they're, good-natured adventurers, end up getting caught up in an epic quest to fight a dragon. This daisy chaining is very classic. I'd say sort of D&D. It's a classic in every sort of staple,
Yeah.
The person stumbling into adventure.
What I would make sure that happens, though, is they find some kind of unique items, if not magical necessarily. Just something unique for them to find as rewards, just so they don't get that feeling of, I'm sorry, but your dragon's in another castle. And just kind of have that Mario effect on them.
Precisely. I'm actually thinking of an almost, like, the first thing that comes to mind for me is like a Mega Man thing where they go to somewhere, beat the boss, get his power, go to the next place, use that power on that boss. So we have 4 locations. We have like 3 major locations, and I'm gonna put the Elven City as a 4th location, just a nice little secret one, or perhaps. Yeah. Or let's and we'll put the dragon as a 5th one. So there's, if you notice, since there's 4 here, and I said there's we're having a classic 4-player party. Each of these sort of goons is going to give a buff to one of the players. We have the classic. We're gonna have the classic classes here: fighter, wizard, cleric, thief.
Yep.
So in that case, we're gonna want to give the person with the least. And since I've said that the magic sword is probably going to be the big keystone of this. Normally I would give the power to the weakest one first, which is usually the fighter, but at low levels, fighters are actually immensely powerful. So I would give it to the cleric because I don't want my players to die. Buffing up your healer early on is nice. So the players wake up the next day, and the players are going to continue on their adventure. The adventure, remember, is to get back at that kobold who stole the he stole the sword, right? So he's not going to find. We're going to have to do your princess is another castle when it comes to that sword. That's just them's the breaks. But instead, we're going to give them something else shiny, and we're going to hint at omens to come. And the way we're going to do that is for our writing. Let's go and do some more writing. So they wake up. They're going to wake up the next day. And if I recall, actually, let's take a look at that one more time. They're going to be pretty close to the dungeon. Now, that dungeon being the one where I put the little kobold general next to. This is the kobold keep. It's going to be probably some sort of rune thing. My first one was goblins stealing a magic dagger and taking it into a ruined cathedral. That's always fun. I've seen bandit hideouts. I've seen... like old crumbling wizard towers. Whatever it is, it's usually going to be old. It's going to be decrepit and crumbling, and it's going to give people a chance to do their stuff. Now, when I'm writing this first, this will probably be start of second session. This will probably take, if the players are good, it'll take just 1 session. If the players are bad, this will take 2. So this is going to be dungeon 1, okay, and it is I'm calling it Kobold Keep. So, first things you want to keep in mind are you're going to want to keep in mind the boss. You're going to keep in mind the boss. You're going to keep in mind his sort of minions. So, and you're going to keep in mind his traps. Kobolds are nice because they're not so dumb that they don't do some traps, but that their traps are primitive enough that the thief will easily spot them. With that in mind, I have mentioned this in previous streams, but everybody gets something in terms of a dungeon. A dungeon, in my opinion, is like an episode. If the entire thing is a major movie, a dungeon would be... Well, I guess the movie thing kind of falls apart here. It's more like a TV show then, because it's an episode where everybody gets their own little thing in the episode. Everybody gets their little focus time. So the thief must disarm traps. Thief gets traps. It's just, otherwise the thief doesn't really get to do his thing. It's likely he gets to disarm he'll probably disarm a booby trap chest. That's the screams of the damned there. Oof. Sorry, Albert, you had something coming out of your speakers.
Sorry, that might have been my keyboard.
It's all right. And we'll give the wizard some... I like to give the wizard the knowledge checks, to be honest, because a lot of people who play wizards are huge nerds. Wizard gets knowledge. So I'm going to have him... I'm going to look at whatever knowledge checks that wizard has. If they are knowledge... and this could be to the ranger as well, if you have a ranger instead. It's going to be your knowledge geography, your knowledge nature, your knowledge arcane, your knowledge religion, if it's a cleric that gets this.
Yeah. Or even history for the location.
Perfect, actually. I completely forgot about that one, but yes, that, and knowledge local. These things are going to be used to give those guys an excuse to roll dice, to throw some dice, as was said. These are going to be things that the players get to do and discover about the world. And it makes them feel, it gives the player a little bit of that sort of special, I did something feel when they use their knowledge checks to discover some sort of secret. Especially when this inevitably will give them some sort of hint as to how to go forward. Typically, I would say something like, if it's a ruined cathedral, the church was said to keep a lot of their donation. When the church went up in flames, it was said that the church, the priest was still managed to take a lot of his donations with him, and nobody knew how he got the gold out. And then later they'll go in and they'll find there's a secret trap passage, right? Like a secret trap door.
Yeah.
Underneath an old worn, what are those things that the priests stand at?
It's the stage where they hold ceremonies.
Pew, right?
Yeah, the pew or the altar. No, the pews are the seats. So you think like the altar.
Altar, right? Yeah. So underneath the altar, there's going to be a secret door that that probably, if you have an elf in the party, the elf's going to spot, or the dwarf. But if not, it's going to be the thief who spots this too. Thief gets a little bit more special here, but he's going to think about this because you're going to pose it to the wizard in such a way that the wizard's going to and ha about how did that pastor get that loot out. It's basically setting up. The wizard basically gets the hints. That's really what the wizard gets. He gets hints that give the player an edge, and the players an edge. So if they're thinking about a monster, the wizard might discover a weakness for the monster. The wizard's the guy with the scouter who's reading out the weaknesses and the power levels.
Yeah.
Cleric also gets a little bit of this. Since I said ruined cathedral, the cleric also gets knowledge. Because once again, anyone who's casting spells is probably a nerd to begin with. It's them's the way it goes. If your cleric is not a huge nerd, you can also give them such things as, I'm trying to think of other things to give them. Well, you're going to give them their bonus here. So the cleric gets loot, and the cleric, of course, gets to tend to everybody's wounds. Cleric's always a tough one for me to write for, without making them too much like the wizard. I usually try to mix the two together and have them work together on stuff. That's how I get around it, but each person will have their own idea. Yeah,
I feel with the cleric, it's important to kind of, depending on how literally and how righteously they take their character. Just because of normally there's a heavy religious element to clerics. Have it be it was a burned down cathedral to whichever domain or god that they worship in particular, so they can kind of be like, oh shit, this was once something that I would have been receptive towards. But also, besides that, even if it's just like a +1 mace, like a simple +1 mace, there could just be a named relic that was thought lost in the fire that the cleric could have the chance of kind of finding.
That's perfect, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not heavily gonna break down the game with a +1 mace at level 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Because it'll give them a bit more bashing power, or if they want to be more like a passive healer type, like they didn't bring in a mace or anything with them, there's okay, I got my spells, I got my walking stick, just something that would suit the character. Like that's something that I'd make after I know what the player has kind of more attuned towards. Like, oh, he found the walking stick of Saint Anthony or something.
That's a great idea. As I said, I wanted to give the cleric some power in the first dungeon, specifically because I want to give them some ability to keep the players in tip-top shape. So, but of course, that always depends on the cleric's personality. If they don't want to be a heal bot, +1 mace is a great way to get them into the action too. But I would also look at such things as finding potions, which relieve a bit of the pressure on them. Or perhaps a wand with a low number of spells left in it. I like what my players used to do was a wand of cure light wounds. That will get you very far, and because in 3.5 you can do that. Just generally some sort of first aid kit of sorts that the cleric can use to keep the players at tip-top condition
without using all their spells.
Precisely, because it gives them a chance to use their spells for other things. Because the clerics can do a lot. Don't start a cleric.
Yeah, clerics can pump out a lot of damage if they really need to.
Yeah.
I've had a cleric in my game just completely devastate an encounter because he just like unloaded everything he had into a guy in this scorched hole in the ground where he used to be.
Now, the fighter is the final one, and the fighter gets violence. When the thief gets his traps, the wizard gets his knowledge, the cleric gets his spiritual knowledge, the fighter gets his violence. And because if you're a fighter, you live for the chance to hit someone real hard. That's what you're banking on. The fighter lives for those 20s. He lives for that perfect stab. So, other things you can give them, depending on the fighter. I mean, when I personally roll fighters, I like to make them a bit more interesting than just I like to hit people. But a lot of people like to hit people too, and don't knock that. I can't knock that, so I give them violence. I give them goons out the wazoo. I will give them kobolds of the worst degree. I will give depending on whether or not I want to challenge their ethics at all, I might give them civilian kobolds. Watch them, execute them.
Or not execute them.
Yeah, or not execute them, as the case may be.
Because a lot of overlooked things. Because personally, when I'm designing a dungeon, I always try to take into account, okay, do these things live here? Okay, that means if they do live here, they're going to have food supplies, they're going to have lodgings for everyone that lives there. They might even have a nursery. Like, how do your players deal with kobold hatchlings, these little tiny gecko creatures that are just kind of meandering around because they haven't quite learned to walk and they're pretty young?
Precisely.
Like, how do you deal with that? You gonna load them into your slingshot and just kind of launch them into the woods?
It's a great thing, especially if the young ones decide that they want to pick a fight because they're taking vengeance for the death of their parents. Always a nice little ethical issue. So from here, you're going to shape your dungeon. So in my case, I'm going to generally have an idea of what I want the place to be like. So it's a ruined cathedral, and let's just say I want 2 floors to the cathedral. It's going to be this floor, and it's going to be this floor. That's all showing up on the thing. Yeah. So I'm going to, shape out the cathedral. It'll be generally like this, and maybe, throw in a few rooms. And we'll have, as I said, that little secret down there. I'll mark this all out. Generally, I'd probably go through this on a piece of paper with a pencil. Just trying to, draw out what I'm making. You're going to go through this a few times because you're going to think about things like the flow of the room. I might go to detail a bit more at some other point about how to make a dungeon flow better. But the general idea is exactly what Albert here was saying, which is that a dungeon is not just this random static thing that appeared. A dungeon is somewhere where things live. It is, in many ways, a dungeon is its own ecosystem. You'll have the kobolds there. You might have a couple of you might have a carrion crawler that is sneaking around and feeding off of their scraps. You might have pets. You might have vermin. All sorts of things are going to live here. You can set up, if you have a ranger, they might find some rare plant or mushroom that can give them a little bonus.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the chance, if you, depending on how much you really want to kind of double down on your dragon theme, like you would have the surrounding area just kind of inhabited by like pseudo dragons, which are just little tiny things with 7 hit points. They look like dragons, but they're about the size of a house cat.
Yeah, it's all good. So these are things that are, as I said, this is their first Dungeons and Dragons. This is their first dungeon. You're going to want it to be nice and straightforward. I would put a puzzle in. I like to make one that's nice and physical, because if everyone's getting together, I like to put a little effort, as I said, into making something a little physical. I made a little rotating disc puzzle the first time I played, and they had a great time with it. If you rotate everything the right way, it forms a picture or something like that.
Yeah.
But there's all sorts of things you can look up on the internet, all sorts of resources.
Yeah.
These things are just they're part and parcel with the dungeon. And then eventually you have your boss. He's slightly tougher. Do not give him too many goons, and do not give him too high and do not give him too much armor, because I swear to God, you will have the players fighting him for hours, just sitting there rolling dice. I said this in other videos. If your players are getting bored with an encounter, either cut its health, or like if it's an inevitable grind fest of they're going to win, just it'll take a long time. Cut its health. You've given it way too much health, and let them kill it in maybe the next 3 turns. If it's too strong in some other way, you're going to want to cut it down. You're going to want to give the player some sort of advantage. Perhaps if you're just like me, where you kind of bend the rules all the time, perhaps when the players get a nice crit in, they're going to knock away the enemy's shield. And then that gives you an excuse to lower its armor. And it also heavily inhibits the creature.
Yeah, that being said, though, I'd also, as opposed to just lowering its hit points, I would lower its AC, because players, I think, when I find at least, would rather be hitting it and doing damage than just, you don't hit it, you miss, it glances.
Precisely.
So, they get frustrated. So even if you just leave it with its set health, drop down its AC by a point or two, not too much that they're hitting it every turn, like, man, how'd this guy get this position? But just so they don't get tired of it.
Precisely. What I did, sorry to interrupt, but what I did was, what I was suggesting is the knocking away the shield thing. You can, I'd say that AC classes can be nice in some situations, only because if you write it, depending on how you sort of write it and spin it, you can have the classic idea of, in fantasy, the fighter and the kobold general in this case are duking it out, like their weapons are clashing against one another, and you're going back and forth, and they're having that weapon clash. But as you said, eventually not hitting the thing is going to get real boring, so you've got to find an opening to, so to speak, to give your players that opening that they need.
Yep. And also sometimes taking advantage of the environment. Just having those things like, okay, so this kobold general kind of felt pretty high of himself, so he made himself like a makeshift throne room with like this poorly secured chandelier hanging from the ceiling. Just gives the ranged person in the party, or even like the rogue, they cut the rope to it, it falls, does a bit of extra damage. They interact with the environment, so it's not so static.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, everything is exactly where it has to be. But no, these things can change.
Yeah,
they can be fluid.
State hazards and the like. Environmental and situational, always fun. You could set things up in such a way that the first encounter goes really quickly. Perhaps you found a poison mushroom, and you threw them into the kobold's food. The rogue snuck in and put it in his drink, and then he drank it, and now he's dead. Things like that may seem unspectacular, but it's a victory nonetheless. In that, I'd be careful with it, actually, now that I think about it. Perhaps not something that instantly kills it, but in that case, the Kobold King is going to be woozy for his fight,
Yeah.
And that'll make things considerably better, and that gives the rogue his nice little, yeah, I did it. So that's your first dungeon. Your loot's not going to be too strong. As I said, The person who really gets something is going to be the cleric, and you're going to give the gold. Now, gold's a little bit of a dangerous one because with gold you can buy many magical weapons if you let your players. And the way around this,
3.5 really is the shopping mall of magic items. You can just walk into a store and be like, "I'd like a dozen magic swords off the shelf, please."
well, there's a way around this though, which is you set I call it setting the power level of an area.
Yeah.
And the way you do this is, so in our example here, we had our lovely little town, right?
Yeah.
The next town that they're going to naturally go to, the place they're going to go to is, once they complete this dungeon, they're going to obviously learn, the magic sword's gone. And because we want to set up for this boy here, our cockatrice, we're going to say that, we're specifically going to set up for this guy here, our second in command, our dragonborn general. We're going to say that the kobolds were actually under his command. You'll probably set this up somehow throughout the dungeon. Storytelling in the dungeon's a nice little thing that you could do to add some more flavor to the dungeon, but you're going to make sure that that in some way, perhaps it's a note, perhaps it's a surrendering kobold who confesses, or perhaps that you just see some merchants who left and they got attacked by this guy and he was wielding the magic sword. So it puts you on the case. So the players, whatever it is, the players can't find what they're looking for here. They need to go further, and that's going to be to this next dungeon. So they're going to believe that he's there, and instead they're going to find his pet. Or perhaps he's going to see them, release the pet, and run away laughing because, villains. So,
yeah. Always give your villains the opportunity to monologue, because that's just... People, they know it's a cliche, but when everything's just silent, you have the occasional cuss flying back and forth. Especially big bads. Yeah. They need they need to explain themselves and be like, "Hi, I'm doing this because soon the red dragon will awaken, lay waste to this impotent land." And
precisely.
So on and so forth.
Well, yeah, because if you look at the way things would really go in terms of fantasy Europe or whatever, they would see the guy and they would stab him. And that would be about it because, in truth, fighting was very grisly. It was a very brutal encounter, and it was over very, very fast. Fantasy, on the other hand, people can go at it, banging swords against each other. You could have guys with 2 swords. In reality, 2 swords is a terrible idea. But you'll see, the drow, our drizzed clones, we have enough of them, flying around with their dual scimitars like a goddamn whirling dervish slicing through entire armies. But then that's because fantasy is supposed to, dramatize things. So
yeah, it's supposed to lend itself to that sense of their fantasy.
Exactly. It's everybody wants to have that sort of feeling big, and so even the bad guys, they need to feel big too. Now, that's as I said, this is going to cover probably your first 3 sessions. Okay, this dungeon and all this. So your first 3 sessions are down. Now you're on to session 4. You're about halfway through at this point. And honestly, it doesn't look like that if we look back at our map here. But things are going to accelerate from here in the way I look at it. Some people will take it a bit slower and they'll drag this out a bit more. But I generally, if I'm doing a short little thing, they're going to get to level 3 here. So I'm going to be watching their XP. Now they get to this place, Selgaunt or whatever. Silgaunt?
Yeah.
And this is where they're going to have their first chance to shop. The way that we make them not go completely out of control, as Albert pointed out, the insanity of 3.5 shopping is the average town does not have a blacksmith who can make magic swords. He can't. Yeah. They don't know how. So
this can also lend itself to being a good reward mechanism. So, like we were talking about earlier in the stream about the merchants getting ambushed on the road.
Yeah.
This could be an exact response to that. It's like, okay, we just don't have things to sell because our merchants are getting ambushed on the roads.
Yeah.
These things are getting stolen from us, and then that kind of lends to because okay, we want some magic items. So now we got to go bash some heads and kind of be the road law. Precisely. And kind of secure the magic flow back to the town.
Well, here's the way we're gonna connect this though is remember we established our elven city, right? Now elves are obviously an excellent source of magic. So if the magic is coming out of the elven wood, then maybe the merchants from the Elven Forest aren't leaving because the roads aren't safe. So none of the magic items are getting out of the Elven Forest. First off, you establish that the Elven Forest is the place to go for magic weapons. Secondly, you establish that you can't get them right now because the roads aren't safe. So you have the players going towards the magic city because they want magic loot, but you also have them going this general direction because when they're in town, they're going to hear about this big guy who just, breezed through here with his magic sword and his army of kobolds, and he ruined everybody's day, and he was last seen up here at Castle number 2, I'm going to call it. It's not a castle, it's going to be a cave, or it's going to be a fort, or it's going to be whatever, but it's going to be something, it's not going to be a cathedral is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So now we're going to have, so the player's going to take time to shop here. If you feeling particularly interesting, quirky, brave, whatever, this is the point where we're going to have some town shenanigans, as I call them. Town shenanigans will probably take at least half, if not an entire session. So if third session was the tail end of the dungeon, the rest of third session is town shenanigans when they get to when they get to town 2. So
Yeah,
that's
going to be their shopping, and they're in the inn, or maybe some of them want to be more, I'm just going to go start a bar fight, or somebody wants to go to the brothel. This is your chance for them to kind of make the town feel a bit more lively instead of it just being a quest hub style town.
Yeah. So the way you do this, and I'm calling this general stupidity, is because that's exactly what it is. And the way you do this is you are going to, the way I do it at least, is I write maybe 4 scenes, okay? And these 4 scenes are just generic free-floating scenes. They are going to be things like you walk by and a flower girl is selling flowers, okay? They are going to be things like the town drunk picks a fight with you, okay? Or a pickpocket tries to steal from you, or whatever. These are all things that are completely by themselves innocuous things that just add a little bit of flavor to the town. I would like to point out here also that this is your chance to, describe a town that is not just a generic fishing town. If your first town was a generic little town, this town's going to have some spice to it. I remember one time I did a town in a place like this, and the whole idea was that it's always rainy, right? And my idea was I wanted to have that sort of sound of rain on tin roofs. So the whole town was sort of like, I made it out kind of like a Brazilian favela. So it was just like buildings upon buildings, and they all had tin roofs because there was a lot of tin in the area. So, and it was always a very rainy area, so everybody was very, everybody was trying to hunker under the shelter. So you just had this big sprawl of long roofed places, and I constantly had that sort of tin sound of, rain on tin roofs just playing in the background, just as a nice little ambient. And basically, it added a lot of flavor to the place, because you had people that were constantly, hunkered down inside, staying away from the rain. So you had people that it naturally lends itself to a bit more of a scummy, underbelly type town, or perhaps a more noble, very peaceful town, depending on how you want to look at that. So yeah, these 4 scenes are going to be your starter points for stupidity if your players don't invoke it themselves. So your players are probably going to invoke it themselves. A brothel will get burned down. The bar fights will happen. Someone's going to die. The town guards will be called, etc., etc., and they will probably leave town with half of town in flames. But let them basically what I'm saying is let them have their fun. They're going to want to do it, so they'll make the scenes for you. Here you just have to write just generic stuff that when you see the chance you can slip it in.
Yeah. No plan survives interaction with the players, so just be prepared that something like that will happen, even if you don't really expect to go in. They're going to be worn out from the battle, so they're going to go in town, probably go immediately to the inn and then pass out. That might seem like the intelligent thing that they do on paper, but they're like, okay, no, we want to get completely sloshed and start a bar fight.
Yeah. So
just try to be flexible around that. Being too rigid as a DM can really irk some players because they'll want to do things, but there's just not within what you already had planned. So you have to. It's a lot of practice with just getting used to going on the fly.
Precisely. So with those 4 scenes, these 4 scenes you're actually holding to your chest. So, and the reason why is because when the stupidity starts, if the stupidity in this case is the players get into a bar fight, that little scene I said with the flower girl, the moment that the players, break out, leave the tavern, the guards are going to be called. So you might have a situation where the little girl comes up to them and says, I can hide you down this. If you hide down this alley, I'll tell the guards to go the other way, but you got to buy all my flowers, because the little girl's a little bit of a, bit of a scummy. She wants that money, so she's going to try and put a little bit of pressure on the players. Or perhaps that old drunkard is going to go by and he doesn't like the town guards, so he's going to point them the complete opposite direction. Or, perhaps someone, or he might invite you in for a drink if you guys are completely drunk already. He might see you as another fellow hobo and invite you over to the hobo keep, where all the hobos stay. The idea is generally you take these scenes that you wrote up, these 4 scenes, and you mutate them into whatever you need for that specific scenario in order to make it more memorable. So that's generally the way you'd go with that. And so from there we can move on to Dungeon 2 and adventuring up, the adventure up to Dungeon 2. So Travel to 2, pretty much the same as Travel to 1. You're gonna have events. I would put, because if we look at the distance, it's about, let's say, twice as far as before. Maybe, hard to say. You're not going to give them a completely, one encounter, whatever sort of room. So let's say they're going to go and they'll stop about here. Then they'll stop about here. Depending on how large you want the scale to be, depending on whether they've got a caravan or they're just going on foot, or depending on whether or not you're just impatient and you want to get them to the next dungeon, that'll decide how many events they get along the way and how many nighttime raids there are. If you don't want to care about things like how much rations they have, you might just say, screw it, you guys go there. And if anyone asks, how did we walk 5 miles in 2 hours? You ask them, I don't know, do you want to walk 5 miles in 2 hours? Basically, you're getting their idea of it. Sometimes I just like to travel them there. Sometimes they want to take their time. So my general point is, once again, learn your players, figure out how much of this they want. They might just want to get to the next dungeon because they've just left town. Now, once you get to the dungeon, we said we did the cleric last time, so let's give the thief his bonus this time. So we're going to give the thief the bonus this time. As I said before, the cockatrice is going to be the sort of bad of this dungeon, and we're going to set it up much like the first dungeon. Same sort of beats. You imagine you have a sort of ecosystem. You're probably going to get a few pictures to inspire yourself with, some nice inspiring pieces of art that you can look at and say, that is what this dungeon is going to be like because I like that piece of art. Let me see if I can pull up a lovely piece of art.
Yeah. So if it's going to be like, try doing the cathedral, if it's going to be like a cave, or even since that this is going to be the place where you want the thief to kind of get that thing, this could just be an abandoned bandit hideout that the kobolds have moved into, because that's going to lend itself already to having more traps, like hidden corners, false walls, and something like that would really lend itself to the idea of this is going to be for the rogue to kind of shine, so let's put the rogue in the rogue's environment, hiding them in an abandoned bandit keep or thief's guild that could be directly related to the town they just left.
I just found a lovely chapel. This is just some art I found on the internet. But something like this may be your inspiration and may provide your entire dungeon design. This is just, as I said, chapel. You'll find all sorts. Just be ready to save art as you find it, because my God, you'll have so much of this garbage.
Oh yeah, no, things like Pinterest and just other websites like it are good for just any kind of image-based board.
Yeah.
Social media. You'll find lots of inspiration, even if not for the specific moment you're looking for, just as potentials for the future.
Exactly. And you'll have like 50 pieces of art. You may use 10 of them. That's the way it goes. Sometimes You accumulate stuff, and you will never get to use it. So, second verse, same as the first in terms of our dungeon. We're going to figure out what our sub boss. We're going to figure out what our sort of boss is. We're going to figure out what the boss is. We're going to figure out what the minions are, and we're going to figure out what the traps and general environmental things are. If, as you said, it's a sort of thieves, it's an old thieves guild or something like that, or a bandits fort, then we're going to have to think about, are any of the bandits left? If this is an abandoned one, who's moved in? Well, we said it was the lizard man. We're going to establish a bit. He was established a bit probably in the previous town and at the previous boss, but we're going to really establish him here. This is where he gets most of his story stuff, because he's not going to actually really either appear or do much here other than release his pet on you. So we can write all sorts of stuff, and it depends on what sort of goons we want him to have. Maybe he has some orcs as his followers. Maybe, as I said, bandits. Up to you, but keep a nice coherent theme. And just remember, everybody gets their own thing. The thief gets their traps. The wizard gets their knowledge. The cleric usually gets their knowledge too, and a chance to, maybe heal some deadly poisons or something like that. And the fighter gets his violence. Everybody gets their thing. Give everybody their treats, and at the end of your ride, and of course, I'd say if the first place had one puzzle, I would give the second one either two easy puzzles or one slightly harder puzzle. And always remember that players can be notoriously thick-headed on the dumbest of things. I have had puzzles that were startlingly easy take days. Like actual days of people working on it outside of game because, well, they really wanted to figure it out. And I've had puzzles that looked horrifyingly complicated and had them solve it in 2 minutes. It's disappointing when they do that, but them's the breaks. There are plenty of books you can use for puzzles. There are plenty of places you can use for them. And unless you are psychotic, do not make them into coded messages, please. I have done this, and I have made this mistake too many times. If you make it into a cipher, it will either be too hard or it will be too easy. There is no in between. Unless, Albert, you have any experience with this?
As far as puzzles and traps go, I've used them on a few occasions, but one time I had done it. I couldn't have made it more obvious what was going on, and they just kind of didn't want to address it or weren't really catching on to the hooks I was trying to give, which could equally have just been my fault for kind of dropping the ball. But it always try not to. The one thing I will say is try not to hide things behind dice challenge too much. Like if it's the one piece of information they need to solve the puzzle and they just don't get that dice roll, don't be like, oh well, now what are you gonna do? Because it's hidden behind that dice roll.
Yeah, no, that's.
Try to even if they get a low roll, be like, okay, so if some time passes, you're not very eloquent, but you find out X, you find out what you need to open the door, the hidden password, the whatever it is.
Yeah. The way I get around that is if I have typically I'll have them run with an NPC. I learned that a long time ago that an NPC does help tremendously if it's just another member of the party that you could play as. That'll just help them as another guy because that person can drop subtle hints. But if you don't have one, the way I usually do it is if the players first off, do not give the players the solutions if they look like they're having fun with the puzzle. So if the players just flat out ignore the puzzle or trying to find brute force ways around it, that means they don't want to do your puzzle. If the players are spending a really long time trying to figure it out and they're stumped, don't give them it. They want to solve your puzzle, right? So if they don't want to solve your puzzles and they're looking for other ways around it, like if it's a door with a code on it, if they're trying to use a crowbar and pry the door open, let them have it. Just let them have it because they're not having your door anyways, and they don't want to do your puzzle. Don't take offense to it either. Some people don't want puzzles. Some people don't like that in their game. So, it's going to be up to you, and it's going to be up to your players. But when I have an NPC, I try to write them as they can give subtle hints on the issue without, hand holding their way through it. Once again, up to your players, up to you, and up to your challenge. But for the love of God, do not do cipher codes. Everyone will hate you, or you will have that one person in your party who is actually a sort of a up and coming cryptologist, and they will annihilate all of your puzzles in record time. Either way, not a great time, so don't try it. Now, moving on from here, I think Owlbear is just gone out for a second. He'll be back. So going on from here, let's move on to the next place, because I think that you get the dungeon by this point, I hope. If you don't understand this, generally, at any time, if you guys want to come onto the Discord, we have a Discord. Come on, ask me a few questions, ask any of the other bestiary a few questions, or ask any of the other GMs here a few questions, and we'll do our best to answer it. So, that's the thing, but it should be pretty straightforward at this point. You're going to be kind of following a bit of a pattern of beats here. At least I do when I'm writing. It's going to be get to your dungeon. It's going to be players do stuff, set up a challenge. Players that are doing dungeon, set up the next challenge either in the dungeon or just after the dungeon. Rinse, repeat. And you daisy chain things together. There'll be variations on this, but you should be getting into a beat by now. You should be starting to figure out what you like to do, what you're good at, and what fits your style. So from here, we're going to assume that the players get to the big bad. You've written up some lovely description of this horrible monster that the Dragonborn here has sicked upon the party. They go through, as we mentioned before, we came up with that idea that if they get petrified here, we're going to bring them to the Elven City. But if they manage to kill it, good job. Always be careful. If your players get wiped, you have to figure out ways around that. In the case of everybody getting petrified, I would have it something like they wake up later, and the cockatrice, has stored them for later and is now asleep. To give them that jump and second chances, some people are going to be less merciful and they'll just, kill everyone off. I would usually find some way to get the players out of that sticky situation if they all get wiped, because, once again, I don't like using wipes personally I don't like using insta-kills because of the nature of then everyone died without them really having a chance to do anything. So, from here, players are probably going to hear that the big bad, as I said, we're accelerating things, so the players are probably going to hear in some way or another about the big bad's the quote-unquote big bad, the Dragonborn's connection to the final boss, the dragon. We've established that the dragon's there. We've established a little bit about him, and we're going to, move from here. So the players are going to go to the Elven City. This is going to be much like their previous jaunt, except, as I said, here we're going to give the big power boost. This will be where the wizard gets his power boost, because, nice Elven City, lots of magic. Give everyone a chance to dip their feet into roleplay with the elves, whether you're Lord of the Rings elves or freaking snack mascots, Rice Krispies elves, whatever sort of magical forest you write for yourself. I don't know if that's being picked up or not. Sorry about the noise in the background if it is. Let me see, is that? Nope, it's not really getting picked up. Okay, that's fine. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure it's not a problem here. So, yeah, now we're going to move from the Elf City, pretty much the same as before. From here, it's going to become I'm going to be saying that a lot, because we're following the same beats. You give them the Elven City, you give them a few adventures here, and by adventures I mean scenes. Perhaps they spend a few days here, they're going to pick up some wisdom. This is probably, since this is the last major city they're going to reach, you're going to stock them up on supplies here, and you're going to give them a very concrete sort of establishment of the boss, of the final boss. You're going to tell them all sorts of things about that boss. about this dragon. You're gonna, write up its lore properly, and you're gonna give it a chance to shine, so to speak, before it actually appears. Now, from here, you send the party on their mighty way. You can do all sorts of fluff on the way. I like to write scenes about talking about, if they go over a river, talk about the creek, the bubbling creek that they pass over. Have them all have a nice little moment of appreciating the scenery. All sorts of flavor text. This is your chance to sort of flex your creative muscles and write whatever sort of colorful verbiage you want. So you do that. We get to this dungeon. This is going to be where they get their almost big bad. This is probably at this point, they probably thought this was the big bad, and so they're going to be geared up for a big fight. So this fight, you're going to want to make it pretty spectacular for them. They're going to give them all sorts of tricks, trials, tribulations. They finally are going to get the sword after defeating this dragonborn, and that's when you say surprise and wake up the dragon. So there are plenty of ways to make this sort of moment really epic. The way I would do it would be something perhaps, as I said, I wanted the dragon to really be a problem. So perhaps this is a keep. This place is a nice little tower or something. You know what, a tower, sure. Because I want them to have a nice high view. So they defeat the dragonborn at the top of this tower. We've done all the things we said before. Remember, we've thought about the boss, we've thought about his minions, we've thought about the traps. Everybody's gotten their moments. We've given the boss his stuff. We've set up the treasure. We've set up all this stuff. At this point, you can give gold, but gold's not going to be a whole lot of use because they're not going back to a town at this point. This is right before the big finale. So, you're going to want to give a lot more things like potions. Like if you'd give gold, think about it this way. If you give gold, you could give them gold, or you could just give them magic potion that they would have bought with that gold. That'll give them the healing now instead. These types of things are always going to be more useful moving ahead. You're going to refill the arrows of the archers in this dungeon. You're going to, as I said, refill the potions, refill the archers' arrows, refill basically any sort of resources that need to be refilled. You're going to refill them here. And because you're gearing up for the final thing, because I'm assuming in the Elven City that you've geared up your players a bit better. Everybody's got their stuff ready, and as I said, if they got to level 3 with the cockatrice, this guy is going to be their match at also level 3, and when they beat him, they're level 4. So they're at the top of the tower. This is the way I would spin it. I'd spin the emergence of the dragon, and this is where the other shoe drops. They're at the top of the tower. They defeat the dragon. They hear a terrible roar. Sorry, the dragonborn. They hear a terrible roar, and the dragonborn is bleeding out, and he laughs, and it's like, it's too late. He's already free. They look out the window, and the dragon comes out, and he torches the Elven City. So all that lovely stuff, because you should have written a bit up about this city. All this lovely city that you've probably written up, and how noble and beautiful and everything. This is something that you set up just to trash. I'm sorry if that's getting picked up. Somebody is playing with dishes in the background. So I've said this before in the one shot. This in our one shot episode. This is the type of thing that you build up for the sake of establishing power. Or no, it was in the villains episode, right? Where you set up something for the sake of establishing power. This village you're going to set up for the sake of establishing power, and that's going to be the dragon's power in this case. The dragon flies overhead, just burns the crap out of this forest. You can have it as gruesome or as not gruesome as you want, considering they're pretty far away. That ruins the place and flies back to this keep. Now, they don't, at this point, the players could leave. The players could go home. They've got the sword. Their quest is over. But you have just given them their first chance to step up as heroes. To really step up as heroes. You should, along the way, you should have seeded a few ideas about this dragon. You should have seeded, perhaps this dragon was around in the past, ruined the area, perhaps it ruined the cathedral, perhaps it ruined that place where the cockatrice was. Perhaps this tower was set up as a fortification to watch out for this dragon because he was such a terrible threat. whatever you're doing, you're going to set up this problem in such a way that, because as I said, nobody lives in a vacuum, that everybody else is basically prepared. It basically has already like pre-reacted to this boss appearing. And by that I mean, when I say pre-reacted, I mean this boss has been here before and caused these problems, or these people are fearful that this boss will emerge. So immediately you have like tripled down on the tension in this scene just by having that guy come up. Because all of that stuff you set up before, all of that stuff about this problem being in the distance, suddenly this all comes to a head. This is here and now. You can walk away, you can go home, but if you do, everybody's going to have a problem. So this is where the real, merit of them comes up. This is where your players get a chance to really step in. And instead of just being given the quest, it's to take up arms and take the quest for themselves. So from here, hopefully you've set up things in such a way it's so tense that your players immediately go after the dragon. If they don't, if they decide to go straight back to the village, then, well, don't feel too bad about it. It's sometimes they just want to go back. But when they do, you're going to want to have the mayor or whatever, thank them for it all. In our case, the magic sword, he's going to give the magic sword back to that fighter. And he's going to say, now please, could you do one last thing for us? Save us from the dragon. You're going to basically put out the players in a spot where they have to do it. Because, frankly, you want them to do that final fight. Remember, we established here, we wanted the players to be fighting a dragon. Since Dragonborn here should have given them level 4, they are going to be ready for this fight. They don't need to be leveling up anymore. This is probably going to be session 6 or session 7. And so we're ready to just end this. Write as many or as few of these encounters as you want, but the players should be escorted pretty quickly back to this final keep. Now, this is where all of it's going to come together. All that stuff about the dungeons before, this is nobody's particular dungeon. This is not to favor anyone, but this is where everyone's skills come together. You might take previous challenges and step them up and then reintroduce them. If you used a puzzle, perhaps you use an upgrade version of the same puzzle. Any sort of writing about the environment or anything like that, you're going to want to double down on it. How intimidating is this old castle? How high are the ramparts? How ancient is it and crumbling? Just ham it up, This is the big finale. I think Owlbear's back?
I am.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
It's all right.
Just to key in one thing. When players, after they finish an encounter and they want to go back to town to rest, I find there can often be that sense of from players that every time they finish any kind of combat or anything, they want to rest so they can get their spells back, which is a completely valid tactic if there's no direct pressure on them. But try to keep the world fluid. So if they don't go straight from the Dragonborn keep straight to the dragon to deal with the problem, they should get the advantage because they're walking in without them having the chance to kind of prepare. Alternatively, if they want to go back to town and rest, they get the sword, but that also gives the dragon time to prepare and just kind of keeping the world fluidly.
Yeah. The way I would do that is if the dragon went out to attack the village, he is to the elven village, he is coming back and he is feasting. So he is going to be, tired. He's going to be dopey. They'll have a chance to sort of sneak in and have that first strike. If they don't, though, if they take the time to rest and then come back, he's going to be fully rested. He's going to be alert. And when they walk in that final room, he's going to be ready for them, and there is going to be fire flying. So, as Owlsbear said, that's an excellent point. Make sure that the enemy, if they go straight from the Dragonborn Keep to the final boss and they're exhausted, what I like to do is I like to give them just a little bit of a boost. Perhaps a magical healing spring that gives the wizard back some of his spells and gives them back a little bit of health, but doesn't completely ready them. Because once again, you don't want them to have a chance to buy things and, take all the time in the world. You want them to have enough health and everything to just be able to hang on by the skin of their teeth. You want this to be a fight for the ages. So somebody might die here. That's okay, but you want to make sure that it's an epic battle. You know, put some pressure into it. And if all goes well, that original idea that we had at the very beginning of this, that knights fighting a dragon, that'll come. And when that comes, you get to ham it up, and and everybody is going to have a good time. Because these are the moments that people remember, right? A lot of D&D, I find, in any sort of tabletop, the ideas that you come up with end up being the most memorable ones. The sort of scenarios that you came up with to start with, when they actually get, finally invoked, they become those things that everybody's talking about later. So just remember that, because that's where you're going to put your passion. That's where you're going to put all your energy. Just, I've said this, you can go back to my one shot and get a bit more information on this, but it's so important at this point that you make sure you have a strong and just satisfying climax. That sounds kind of sexual, but
that's exactly where it needs to be. That's how you end a good session.
Precisely. So at that point, you should be about 7 on session, probably 7 to 8. You'll probably be on session 8 at this point. And if this is the end, feel free to give ludicrous rewards. So if they finally kill that dragon and you're not using these characters again, there's going to be mountains of gold. There's going to be, treasures beyond mortal comprehension littering this place, because that dragon has a heck of a hoard. Feel free to sprinkle all sorts of lovely stuff, because, it's over. You're not going to have to worry about scaling this anymore. Just, shower them in riches, so that when you write your final scenes, they can do all sorts of whatever the characters wanted to do, whatever the players want their characters to do. If the thief always wanted to open a tavern, he can use all that gold to do that. Or if the fighter wanted to journey on a quest to master the way of the sword, he can take that magic sword and just walk out into the wide unknown with a heck of a lot of gold in his pocket. However you write this last piece, make sure you give everybody a nice little bit of satisfying flavor and conclusion. I would take some time beforehand to try and go back through and remember what everyone's players wanted. Like, go through, maybe look at their character sheets again, or just ask them, a bit about their character. They'll give you a lot of things that you probably wouldn't have expected, and a lot of stuff that you can really work with. So at this point, I think we've basically written a campaign. We've written encounters, and we've written dungeons. This is a little campaign. So what I did here in an hour and 45 minutes is really straightforward. And a lot of people, talk about it's difficult to make a campaign. They don't want to do this because it's a lot of effort. As I said, I just threw something together with the help of Albert and Burzum earlier. Sorry, that would be what was his name? Burzum here. We just went through and we sort of threw together a probably 8-session little mini epic of sorts, and it was the prom. It's not a huge issue. A lot of people think that it's going to be a huge thing. Don't be afraid to just dip your toes in. Even if it fails, even if they just get to that original Kobold Keep, that's fine. You can give them that little adventure and just get a taste for the game. That's the most important thing that I can say at the end of this, as we're sort of coming to a close here, is just remember, the point of this is to have some fun, is to write something that people can really enjoy, regardless of whether or not you're going to go back through it at some point in the future and continue it. It's just a nice little thing to do. Try it out. Don't be afraid to dip your feet in, and just, what's really stopping you, Anything you want to add, Albert?
Yeah, I agree for the most part with everything that's going on. One last note, though. Things that can kind of bog people down worrying about building the encounters is worrying about, like, okay, well, I want them to be this level when they get to this place, but the experience isn't going to add up to that. So I just recommend using, like, a milestone-style experience, so every other session they get a level, they finish the keep, they get a level, they finish whatever, kind of just to kind of stagger it out so you know what level they're going to be when, and you don't have to worry about too much about crunching numbers and okay, we just have to squeeze like 2 more kobolds in this encounter, and then it's just too much because you feel like you might be behind on meeting what level they should be,
Yeah.
and just kind of do milestones as opposed to straight up experience.
Yeah, you can. And if you want to do experience numbers, just cheat. I'm just gonna be frank here. Your players probably aren't looking at the DMG and saying, "But this guy is only worth this amount of experience." If you say he's worth this amount of experience, he's worth this amount of experience. So, at the end of the day, if you want them to be that level, make them that level. Don't be afraid to. I've done things like the mythical fountain of knowledge that they drink from and get at level. Don't be afraid to do things like that. Just gold is actually a considerably more dangerous one in my opinion, but gold is easily controlled by just controlling what your NPCs can sell. So, with all this in mind, really, this is all you need to start yourself off. Grab yourself or obtain through measures I will neither condone nor affirm your own copies of a player's handbook and a DMG and a monster manual from whatever edition you want, or if you're playing Cyberpunk, grab whatever books they require, or if you're playing whatever if whatever you're playing, grab your books, get together, get some friends, and just go for it, man.
Yeah, roll some dice.
Yeah. I hope this kind of goes over a lot of the questions people were having. I'm just trying my best to cover everything. At some point in the future, I'll probably go over in more depth how to write or how to make a dungeon ecosystem a bit better. There's a few things I wanted to cover that I didn't quite get to here, things like traps and stuff like that. I'll probably get to it at some other point. I got a lot of questions, so if you ever have a question about this, feel free to jump on the our server we've got. Its Discord link is probably going to be in the description. I am on pretty much all the time. I'll answer questions, and we've got plenty of people here just chilling and talking about this. Every once in a while, we might even play a few games ourselves. So feel free to join. And with that, I think we're done. And have a great day. Take care.
Good luck.